Hi there, April 16th, 2024. Mike Shope and Adam Krautwurst back with you tonight in the deep end. We'll be joined by Jeff Bell of Football Guys, the excellent rookie draft guide through the combine, maneuvering all through the pro days and everything else. Now we are just over a week away from the NFL draft. We'll talk landing spots in particular. Jeff is our expert for the night. Where do we want these rookies we keep hearing about to be drafted and when? Because when matters too. We'll catch up on a couple of things first. Big announcement from the FFPC today and set things up for the spring and summer, but heavy concentration on the draft next week, naturally, tonight. Thanks for being with us wherever you find your podcasts, Spotify, iTunes. Is there another one?
YouTube, wherever.
YouTube, the PlayerProfiler Network. Thanks to them for bringing you tonight's episode of The Deep End.
What a week. Draft's a week away. We're all out there grinding. Mike, somehow I got sunburn in April in Rochester, New York. Okay. It's just unbelievable. But I'm not going to complain about the summer. What is that? Is that a German blitzkrieg of a uniform you got on there? What is that?
We have known soccer guy Mike Shope in your presence. We have Borussia Dortmund into the Final Four, the semifinals of the Champions League, with their comeback win today over the correct pronunciation, I believe, is Atletico Madrid. So what do you think of that?
Listen, I was watching Mbappe just coast to coast on a goal today to win it in like the 88th or somewhere in the 80th minute, somewhere in there. Dude,
we'll see you next time. We'll see you next time, Mbappe.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Do they redraw in the semis? Is that how they do it again?
I don't think so in the semis. No, they did for the quarters. They do after group stages, but no, I think this is the setup. So what's tomorrow? I know Man City, Real Madrid.
Oh, that's right.
These ragtag outfits.
Yeah, barely getting by. Barely getting by.
European wheat fields are rising to the occasion, but Dortmund, you gotta respect. As Ian Hartitz might say, longtime fan of Borussia Dortmund. Right. I just decided, maybe even more than 10 years ago, loved the crowd vibe. Klopp was the manager.
Yep.
Let's go with these guys. Then became Pulisic and Reina, Holland, of course.
Yep.
So just as long as you're not prepared to ask me about anybody on the team now, I love them. I am in love with Borussia. These are my guys.
That's perfect. Listen, Noah Krautwurst had a great assist over the weekend. I'll tell you that much. Like we're living in the soccer world right now. So I love it.
Yes. We'll bring Jeff Bell on in just a moment. First, saw as you and I were putting our calendar together for a busy draft spring and summer ahead, that FFPC opened up signups for not the never too early. It is no longer not too early to sign up for the regular best ball and super flex best ball tournaments. So those will open right after the draft or, next weekend.
Yep.
But soon, here we go.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't do any never too earlies only because I didn't think I was ready. I was trying to max enter the baseball stuff. And then I'm like, at this point, I'm so behind the curve with all these guys. So let me wait till the actual best ball tourney, which starts after the draft. I like the Superflex tourney too. Like I love Superflex. That's my sweet spot, I think. So when they open the Superflex, I'll jump in that one as well. And so, and and we'll obviously do a bunch of shows on that. I'm stoked to get drafted. Like right after the draft, I'm going to start hitting drafts hard for sure.
I still don't love Superflex.
Why? I've probably asked you this before.
I think I saw Mike Leone on this actually today, but it feels right. You got to be in the top 5. It just seems like to have, not that you have to be, but the weight of the top quarterbacks, and every year can be different. And I feel like I'm under pressure a lot in those drafts.
Yeah.
Where if I don't get my second quarterback, if I'm drafting on the ends and I'm, if I dare go past round 4, that seems even late.
Yeah.
or my second quarterback, I mean, it's hello Drake May or somebody like that. Like, it just seems a little bit like I can be, they say about, we just watched the Masters. You can't win it on the first day, but you can lose it. I feel a little bit like in Superflex, you could lose it early. And I like taking my time with quarterback, with, certain position builds in a 1 QB league. That can lean the other way, right? We've always had that conversation where the quarterback position is not worth enough in that. But, you've got so many prolific scorers with running quarterbacks now. I don't know. I just have still always preferred the 1 QB format to Superflex. Superflex feels like I'm just always under pressure.
But that's okay. Like, we're not only doing Superflex drafts. It's like the icing on the cake of the drafting season. It's the most important position in all of sports. So if you want to dip into a couple of Superflex drafts to feel the rush of taking the quarterbacks early. I mean, I don't know. CJ Stroud is going QB 5 and then at pick 6. Anthony Richardson pick 8. Joe Burrow pick 9. This is Fantasy Mojo, never too early Superflex ADP. I think that's 7 quarterbacks up to the 9th pick. So I think if you're okay with Burrow, Dak Prescott going middle of the 2nd round. So I don't know. I feel like you definitely have to take your second QB earlier, but who would you rather have? Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy, or Anthony Richardson and Jordan Love?
Oh, easily Richardson and Love.
Right. And that's pick 8, Anthony Richardson. So I think.
And what's Love's ADP?
Love is at the 2-5.
Okay, well, what feels right in those slots are drafting Justin Jefferson.
Correct. No, I get that. That's what you mean by forcing it. Yeah, for sure. No, yeah, am I taking Jordan Love, or am I taking Amon-Ra or Justin Jefferson? Right. No, I get that for sure.
And how much does that? Again, it can be quantified, I suppose, but how much is that positional advantage worth at receiver and tight end? Like, who would be a receiver, or not even running back, over tight end, but who would be my wide receiver 1 in round 3? I mean, are we to Garrett Wilson yet? Probably. If I went quarterback to start.
Drake London's the only wide receiver with ADP in the 3rd round.
Yeah. No, yeah. I don't know that. I mean, he's fine, but.
Right. No, I get it.
If you're drafting in the top 4 or so, whatever the number needs to be, the Allen Hurts range, I feel like you can't lose.
I'm looking at number 3 real quick. ADP out of the 3rd hole: Lamar Jackson, Garrett Wilson, Saquon Barkley, Dalton Kincaid, Aaron Rodgers. Like, that's a team I can get on board with for sure. I know half those guys you want to puke at the thought of drafting on your team, but I like that a lot. Aaron Rodgers and Saquon Barkley will never be found on your teams.
That's not true. It requires further analysis. That's
right.
All right. Well, our focus tonight is not so much on Superflex strategy, but it will be. Rather, the NFL draft, which is just over a week away. One of our foremost authorities, who happens to be a Bills fan too, doesn't hurt his candidacy for joining us, is Jeff Bell, from J. Bell Tolls, Football Guys, the excellent, the fabulous rookie draft guide. Jeff is an accountant, and so we are fresh off April 15th, tax day. What's today like for you in real life?
It goes a million miles per hour and then it just stops. And it's kind of one of those things. It's re-entry into the world. And it's almost, tax season is a sprint, but it's also like a marathon, and you got to get yourself into the proper mindset. And then as soon as it ends, what do I do next? And usually this week I'll end up falling asleep at 7:30 at night, because I'll say, what else is there to do? Like, I've been working until 11 o'clock every night for the last 2 months. And so it's just kind of re-entering into the world. And it's a great time of year to re-enter that, because while some people might have gotten bored with the draft or just antsy for the draft, I'm ready to plug back in and figure out what all is going on. And I'm thrilled to be here. So. Yeah,
we have a little bit of that too. I mean, baseball interests and kids sports and other things. Yep. Not quite. I'm sure it's not the 18-hour days or whatever you're putting in leading up to April 15th. But
I I did hear the soccer talk, so I got here right as that was going on, and I coached my 5-year-old daughter's team, and we had our first game on Saturday, and it's fantastic. It's so much fun. So I'm there too. It's Saturday mornings coaching soccer, so I love it.
Very good.
Jeff, I coach U13, U11, and U6.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't necessarily call U6, U5 soccer yet. It's just a bunch of kids who run, and it's my daughter is the U6 one. It's just like, hey, run the right direction, with the ball.
Well, that's a lot of what it is. And we had a talk from the head of the community soccer program and talking about, he wanted to emphasize spacing with these kids and everything else. And I was like, my kids just go get the ball and put it in the net and they have fun doing it. So that's what we're trying to do.
For sure.
Well, Jeff, as we sort of re-enter, as you were saying, into draft mode here with just over a week to go, before we get to specific players, what is maybe your overall feeling or attitude about this particular year? What makes this year interesting or different for you, if you can sort of encapsulize the whole draft?
I mean, we've headed in the direction over the last 10 years or so, the emphasis on the passing game, especially in the first round, looking for players that can impact the passing game. Tackles, wide receivers, quarterbacks, edge rushers, and corners. And this draft is just full of the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, and the left tackles, which we love for fantasy football because that makes things more interesting. And that's one of the biggest things I think coming into this draft is going to be a very fantasy fun draft. You're going to see a lot of wide receivers go very early, quarterbacks reshaping teams. And so as a fantasy player, fantasy analyst, draft analyst, it's exciting when we get drafts like this, whereas I think a couple years ago, we really had a meat and potatoes draft where it was a lot of defensive linemen, a lot of edges, a lot of those types of players off the board in round one.
Yeah, those are the worst for fantasy, and especially because I think a lot of us now, I grew up watching the draft as locked into the Bills and whatever they're doing, but now it's like the Bills are almost kind of secondary to the fantasy space and so it's like you said, it's exciting to have the wide receivers, the quarterbacks, not so much the running backs anymore. And I think that reflects in a lot of people's. I know you have a football guys do a great draft guide. I mean, I was just reading through it thoroughly today, and it's so good. And yeah, you just see a lot of the running backs just aren't a thing anymore. I remember, growing up, it was the first round's full of Cedric Benson and all these. The Bucks were taking. You had 3 running backs in the top 5 picks in the NFL draft one year. Now you can't even get 3 in the first round. Is that a year? You think that's going to be a year-to-year thing? Is this a down running back class? Does that kind of help the whole no running backs in the first round thing?
I mean, it is a down class. Last year, we saw Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs go very early off the board. And so when you do have those running backs that can impact the game, and especially you talked about the passing game, that can impact the passing game, they're going to go off the board. And these players that can create big explosive plays, that's what NFL offenses are seeking. We just don't have a lot of those players in this particular draft. But you're exactly right. I mean, growing up, and the football mindset has shifted dramatically from when we were growing up. You would put your best player at running back, and then you would just basically try to play defense and let him touch the ball 35 times a game. You just don't see that anymore. Even trickling down, we just talk about youth sports. They're no longer just putting the best player, even in youth sports, just at running back and giving him the ball and attempting to do that. It's so much more about the passing game.
You're very kind to include me in that. When I was growing up, the best player on the football team was usually linebacker/kicker. So times have changed, certainly a couple of times over since then. With Jeff Bell, we'll get into some specific players and where Jeff would maybe most or least like to see them be drafted in just over a week. With Jeff Bell, Mike Shope, and Adam Krautwurst in the deep end. Before we get into players specifically, let's take a minute for a word from our sponsor.
It is NFL draft season and the wait is over. The Player Profiler Rookie Guide is available. It's live on the site now. Right there in the nav bar, click on the 2024 Rookie Guide to download it. It's so comprehensive. We're ranking and writing up more players than anybody. And this year, we're providing athleticism scores. We're doubling the number of advanced stats on each player profile. And guess who's back? Cody Carpentier. But it's not just him. It's Theo. It's Matty Kiwoom. It's John Lobb. And the Undroppables. All coming together to provide their composite rankings. And this year we're adding Superflex Tight End Premium because that's now become such a popular format. So get those composite ranks, get the write-ups, the comps, the stats and metrics you want. If you already have Dynasty Deluxe, you already have it. But if you don't, it's right there in the nav bar on playerprofiler.com. It's $20. It's not the first. It's not the most expensive, but it is the best.
Welcome back. So, Jeff, no better place to start with any draft than at the top. We had our Justin Fields trade, as underwhelming as it was, anticlimactic as it was. Still, though, with just over a week to go, and this is somewhat typical, who knows what happens at 2, 3, 4, 5. It gets really interesting right after Caleb Williams. With respect to Washington at 2, what are you buying? I believe as we're speaking tonight here on Tuesday the 16th, the next 4 quarterback prospects, including Penix as QB5, not Caleb Williams, are all in Washington, meeting with the Commanders together. Some parts together, some parts not. I don't know. That seems very weird. Washington is trying very hard, too hard, I think, to keep the secret. What are you betting on it too, and what would you like to see for fantasy?
I think it's a better fantasy landing spot than maybe I gave it credit for even earlier today. Like looking back and thinking that you're going to have Jahan Dotson, you're going to have Terry McLaurin there, you're going to have a shootout potential there. When I circle everything up, and I agree with you, it is interesting to me that they're smoke screening this so much, and I just think that I don't know if they want the attention. I don't really understand why do that type of thing, because you kind of know who it's going to be at this point, you would think. In my gut, I think it's going to be Drake May, because when I look at Drake May, and I think it's a situation similar to CJ Stroud last year with Houston, where there started to be some buzz about Will Levis potentially being the pick for Houston or what direction they might go. Then they get up, turn the card in, and basically say, well, we decided on CJ Stroud way back in January. We knew he was going to be the guy. And I think that when you look at May, he just checks so many boxes for what NFL offenses and NFL teams in general are looking for in that franchise quarterback. Daniels, obviously more explosive player, and Daniels, I can't discount that potential either, because the Washington Brain Trust is a little bit outside the box relative to what we've seen in the NFL, where they have that NBA background. And I like the NBA quite a bit. I follow the NBA, and usually in the NBA draft, what you're going to see early is a bet on potential, a bet on a player that might be a little bit more raw, that might have a higher upside. And so in my gut, I'm thinking if this is an NBA mindset, then Jalen Daniels would be that guy that would have that higher upside potentially if he hits and works out. But it's that conflicting feelings between what traditionally an NFL team would love in Drake May versus the potential upside swing with Daniels.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at that, Jeff. I mean, listen, in the NBA, they take players in the top 5 that aren't even going to play on the team for like 2 years, like they're in Europe or whatever. I would love to see Jaden Daniels be the second quarterback off the board. I don't love him for him. I don't love him going to the Commanders, because again, I just think they're like an organization that just can never figure it out. But again, like you said, you got some new people in there. But I don't know, man. I want to go out on a limb and I think he could be the best quarterback in this draft. I know Caleb Williams has all the the attributes and all that stuff, but I just think Jaden Daniels is Lamar. And he's a better thrower than Lamar was at this point. And I don't know. I think I said it maybe on one of our shows maybe 2 months ago that I just think he's going to be the best one coming out of this class. So for his sake, I'd like to see him go second, and for whatever team, because I really think, like you said, that bet on upside, that bet on talent, where the league is now with all the athleticism at quarterback. I mean, we were just talking about like these superflex drafts. I mean, you don't find a quarterback. I mean, Mahomes is sneaky athletic, Stroud. I mean, it doesn't. You get to Burrow, like is the first one, like QB 7 or 8 that doesn't run, and so you get the can you handle the he might get hurt because he's small framed. It's the Lamar thing where for 2 or 3 years he ended the season on the IR. So I just love Jaden Daniels, and I love to see that you guys have him in your top 2.
Yeah, and especially for fantasy. I mean, that's really what the guide circles quite a bit. The upside for Daniels in fantasy, you're exactly right. He could be the quarterback 1 in fantasy for this class very easily.
Is the Washington receiving core, like, it's better than New England. It's better than the Giants, Arizona, Chargers. Like, it sort of ranks that way. But Can whoever they pick save Dotson? I mean, get whatever the max is out of McLaurin. What do you guys think this pick means, whoever it is, to their receivers? Because generally underwhelming. Dotson last year, downright disastrous. I mean, that was somebody where there was quite a bit of hype in the summer, and it just ended up being unplayable.
Interesting. They had the enemy offense last year one in that, and now they're transitioning away from that right away. The biggest question is going to be, can they protect this kid? Because we saw with how much really damage he took, how many hits he took throughout that season, and that adds quick really flip a mindset on a player. So that's the biggest question, whether or not they're able to build an offensive line to be able to protect him. That defense, from what we've seen, should be shootout potential, which you see Jaden Daniels in LSU, every single game he played down there was a shootout. And so you love that potential, but it's what are they going to do with the other pieces around them? And if they're able to protect the quarterback, I think those wide receivers are fine. I mean, fine to good relative to what you'll see with some other rookie quarterbacks coming in with, or what other players have come in with. You see, like you talked about Justin Fields and the pick there. When Justin Fields was drafted, he was throwing to Velus Jones and Amon-Ra St. Brown's brother, and I don't know who else. And so to have at least McLaurin has established himself. And I do think the upside is still there for Dotson. We've seen him make those plays, but it just didn't translate into last year. But again, that was year one in an offense that's now gone.
How about this, Adam? I'm so good at this, right? Like year 4, is it? And like, you know what we should do? Let's make sure with Jeff, let's like lay out 6 or 8 players and landing spots. He didn't even say Washington. Like let's make sure we're all on the same page here and go over. Washington is literally not on his list. And what do? I just sort of tee up Washington. We go 10 minutes on the Commanders.
Yeah.
What a pro. What a pro.
That's right. Professional.
The best. No, it's just so much fun. I just love talking about football and the scenarios right now as we sit.
Oh yeah.
Week out, we know the key players and just the way that I think we all just want that picture to crystallize so we can kind of take that next step and really start the analysis on something meaningful that we know we're going to see relative to the hypotheticals that we're playing out.
Well, with this draft, everybody's been waiting to find out what Minnesota is going to do since they made that trade with Houston, picks 11 and 23. What's your guess? My feeling is that it's hard for me to believe they would trade for McCarthy, but that depends on whether he goes to New England at 3, which maybe opens up the door for Minnesota. I wonder, I mean, they probably have several different plans, just contingency plans. But what's best for the Vikings, and what do you expect?
As I sit here a week out from the draft, my gut feeling, the thing that I can't get away from is Drake May going to Washington, and New England kind of looking at it as Jaden Daniels doesn't really feel like a Patriots quarterback, whereas even J.D. McCarthy, that feels like a Patriots quarterback, a cerebral guy from Michigan that won a national championship. I mean, that checks like all the Patriots boxes. And so if May were to go to, then I think you see Minnesota potentially sitting there. If New England is going to say to themselves, we got some questions about what we would be putting this young quarterback into, given our structure right now, given our lack of wide receivers, given our lack of offensive line. In Minnesota, we had the rumor coming out of last year's draft that Minnesota wanted to be very aggressive and attempt to get Anthony Richardson, who is a player that we know relative to Jaden Daniels is probably more limited in the passing game in development from Daniels. And so if they're willing to try to go and swing big to get Richardson, you would think thought would stand that they would again be willing to go big to try to get Jaden Daniels and put Jaden Daniels into that offense with Justin Jefferson, with Jordan Addison, give Jefferson an LSU guy, and maybe that helps those contract negotiations a little bit, and it raises the ceiling on their team. And so that's what my gut kind of says right now, or with New England moving back from 3, Minnesota getting very aggressive to go up there, and then maybe New England lets it play out a little bit to decide if they've gotten enough ammo and they want to go back up and potentially get JJ McCarthy, or if they just want to punt like we saw Cleveland do famously with Myles Garrett when they decided for another year to go and get Baker Mayfield that next season.
Yeah, I think the Vikings have to do something at quarterback if they want, because Justin Jefferson might, toe the company line now, but if they don't get a quarterback and he's having a terrible year next year and people keep asking him, hey, are you going to stay? Are you going to sign? Like, what's going on? Like, I think they have to. And they're in the position right now to kind of do it. Like this, everyone's saying this is a loaded quarterback class. You have an opportunity to get up there and get one, get a really good one. Like, how often do you have the chance to get up there and get one of these good players? If you end up at, middle of the pack, pick 15 in a draft that's not so good at quarterback, then what do you do? I think this is the time for sure. I think that's why Cousins isn't there. And so I think the Vikings definitely end up at quarterback for sure. And I think for fantasy wise, whoever the Patriots take, I'm off of for redraft and for dynasty. I mean, they're so far away offensively from being anything. And so, whatever quarterback, I hope they don't take Jaden Daniels I hope they don't. But Jaden Daniels, what's interesting is if Belichick was still there, like Jaden Daniels would have been an option because Belichick always hated playing against those really athletic quarterbacks. So maybe he would have gone with like a Jaden Daniels or maybe even traded up for a Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and I was listening to the Ringer Draft show today, and they were really kind of hammering home how New England has talked about being patient with the potential quarterback position and recognizing where they stand in terms of lack of weapons, in terms of lack of offensive line support. And so that's, I don't know. They just seem to me as a team, again, willing to be a little bit more patient and not forcing the issue, because if you're sitting there at 3, you're not talking about the quarterback 1 or the quarterback 2 in the class. You're already talking about the quarterback 3 in the class. And I think that what we do as people who like to talk about football, we like to talk about the quarterbacks, and that's what the NFL draft turns into quite a bit, but we don't really know where those quarterbacks stand on these teams' boards individually.
And real quick, Mike, I just want to ask a quick question. Someone in the chat asked, there's always a shot Minnesota stands pat and takes Penix at 23. What's your take on Penix? I know he's a little older. He's a little bent. He's been injured quite a bit. Do you think as the shot Penix is there at 23? Do you think he's worth it? Where do you have him kind of amongst your QBs?
I think he's worth it at 20. That starts to be the range.
Yeah.
It still makes me a little bit nervous given his injury history, given the way he really struggled against Michigan. And then even in the Senior Bowl struggled, but obviously the arm talent, and you put him in an offense with Justin Jefferson and with Addison and the ability to attack vertically playing in that dome. I mean, that was probably, well, for any quarterback, Minnesota stands right now, I think, as best case landing spot for any quarterback outside of Caleb Williams going to a Chicago Bears offense that's been able to reload. But we see it all the time. It feels like once you get past those sure things at the top, teams start to talk themselves into a guy because they're worried about the other options. And I do think that we've seen in the last 2 drafts, really, with Will Levis falling down the board a bit. And then you flash back to Malik Willis, where there was so much hype on Malik Willis coming into the draft. And then NFL teams were willing to let him sit into round 3. I think there's been a lot more patience of late in terms of saying, hey, we don't know that he's going to be the guy, and we're not willing to make that bet like we did for years with the Christian Ponders and the Blaine Gabberts and all those players that were kind of very questionable that would always go 9th overall to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so now you're kind of saying, like, hey, maybe we can get a tie in. Maybe we need to add an offensive tackle at 23, or maybe we can add an edge there, and maybe we can be a little bit more patient as we're seeing Michael Penix still on the board, as we're seeing Bo Nix still on the board. If we talk yourself into Spencer Rattler or Michael Pratt, whoever it might be.
I just do not expect. I'm giving the Raiders in particular too much credit for putting it in those terms, like, because they could just they drafted forever like they didn't have the internet. I mean, that's I don't want to say what I'm expecting from the Raiders. I just think it's so bad, Jeff, if they go to Penix in the first round, or if Denver goes to Nix in the first round. Who are they bidding against? I mean, how many teams, when you get maybe Minnesota, but maybe they also trade up. When you get late in the first round, even the Chargers have Justin Herbert. Those teams, Goff made it through. Like, you have the teams at the bottom are okay. Penix and Nix, like 25 years old, 24, 25. They don't make any sense for the good teams. Then you have teams like Carolina. They just drafted their quarterback 1 overall. They're not going back into round 2 for somebody. I don't know. I mean, Denver is light on picks. If I just feel like the Levis lesson is don't force it. You need help at a lot of positions. You're in Mahomes' division. You're going to think Bo Nix is going to outduel Patrick Mahomes for the next 8 years. You talk about not forcing it. I feel like those teams are at risk for forcing it. And if I were in a state like in a free country where you could bet on the draft, I would bet under on the quarterbacks because I think the number is 4 at the most. First round.
I completely agree with you. And we're seeing talk that quarterbacks might go 1, 2, 3, 4 off the board. I'm really skeptical that we see that because I think you're exactly right. That Will Levis example. And I think that teams saw, and then really what the Titans said last year, they saw once they get past their pick, who's going to take this guy? And if we really, if we love him, we're going to go up and go get him. We're not going to mess around with him being there at the 13th pick. And if we don't love him enough to go do that, then why are we going to take him at 13? We'll just bet that nobody else in between now and our next pick doesn't love him either. And so that's kind of, I think, that the flip in the mindset. I think teams have gotten a little bit more patient, a little bit smarter about forcing it and saying we have to get a body at the quarterback position because we don't have one right now. And I think that a lot of the change in it there is because we're seeing so many different types of players able to succeed at quarterback in the NFL, whereas before we had a long run where if you were not the big statuesque passer with a strong arm that can force the ball into press man coverage, I mean, there's no way you could play at the NFL level. And so we're going to have extra pressure to try to take one of those guys because those are the only guys that could potentially succeed. I think now teams have kind of looked at it and said there are a lot of options to succeed at the quarterback position.
Well, we want to get to some running backs before it gets too late on us, because I think there are some interesting landing spot. It's one conversation I'm not hearing at all in the fantasy discourse is so which running backs are the right scheme fit or whatever for certain NFL teams, because plenty of teams could use somebody else in the mix. But we'd be remiss without some conversation about the big receivers. I read a mock draft today from Peter Schrager where there were 8 receivers in the first round. I'm not sure if that's in the range of outcomes. Maybe it is. But you certainly have Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, then Rome Odunze as almost everybody's top 3. What are you watching for with those players? I mean, we talked about maybe a Patriots trade. The Chargers are interesting in there. Of course, Arizona. A couple of thoughts from you, Jeff, if you would, on what you think would be optimal, perhaps is one way to ask this, with those players in mind.
I think it's a little bit of the quarterback conversation in a different way, because if you're looking at this, and especially I do expect those top 3 wide receivers to go off pretty quickly. We've seen the value and the elite receivers get valued in the draft, and relative to not having a standout pass rusher right now, not having a standout cornerback right now, that's going to force the team's hand to go in a different direction. I expect those players will be grabbed. But you start to have that conversation of, well, if there's 8 receivers that we like at pick 13, are we going to grab one, or are we going to take a tackle and be happy with who we get in round 2? And so there's a little bit of a push-pull there. And once you start to see them come off the board, I do expect they'll rattle off the board. But I think teams, it's just so hard to project, because if you love 8 different wide receivers, and we do this in fantasy drafts. If we look at a tier and we say there are 5 wide receivers coming up that I really like, and I know that my second pick is 8 picks away, and right now there's only one running back that I like, I'm going to take that running back, and I'm going to just be happy with whatever wide receiver comes back to me. I wonder if there's going to be a little bit of that relative to the talent and the depth of this receiver class. But the other thing too is wide receiver is such a different position between the different types of players. Yeah. And you're looking at, talk about scheme fit, you're going to have teams that fall in love with this particular player that can play this particular role. And so that's where I think you probably lean a little bit more towards them going off the board. And as you see them go off the board, then they'll start to be a little bit of rapid fire succession, because that's the other thing we see in fantasy drafts is we're seeing players that we want go off, and we're like, you talk about quarterbacks and superflex, and if quarterbacks are sitting there and your league's not taking quarterbacks, you might be a little bit more patient. But then if 4 quarterbacks get rattled off right before you go, you're probably going to take a quarterback because you're really worried about what's going to be left.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's a great point. I was going to ask you about that, about the different types of receivers, and the Dolphins want the smaller, quicker guys, and maybe the Steelers want the bigger outside guys and stuff like that. Super interesting. I wanted to pick your brain on the receivers and the Bills for fantasy, and for, obviously, we're locked into the Bills up here in Western New York. And I think back to the draft, like, I would love to have a Marvin Harrison Jr. with Josh Allen. But you think back to the draft, this reminds me a lot when they traded up for Sammy Watkins. That was a loaded receiver draft too. You had Mike Evans going the first, Brandon Cooks going the late first. You could have just stayed there and gotten future Hall of Famer Mike Evans. But what do you think for Josh Allen in this receiving class? What do you think for the Bills? What do you think is going to happen? What would you like to see them do?
Well, I'll start with what I would like to see them do. I would like to see them get aggressive and go and get one of these quarterbacks. I think that, or one of these wide receivers.
No,
I'm sorry.
That would be very
you're breaking my heart.
Reckless, some would say. Reckless.
You heard it here on the deep end.
No. Go get one of these wide receivers, because I think that when you look at where Josh Allen is in his career, I mean, we're right in the prime of his career, and these are his best years right now. And so to give him a young receiver, and I think the other thing too, you look at where the team is right now, and they really had to pay some bills this year, no pun intended, in terms of having to reset that salary cap a little bit. But if you were to go get one of these elite receivers and he turns into a true number one wide receiver in your offense, that is massive savings that you're really rolling throughout the remainder, the best years of Josh Allen's career, when you talk about having that control for 5 years versus a player that's going to be looking at for 25, 30 million, whatever it ends up being after Justin Jefferson signs his contract on the open market when they hit. And so that allows you to reset and rebuild some other areas of the team that have seen some atrophy and some age that's kind of chipped away at those. So that's where I want them to be aggressive and get a wide receiver to be that number one guy. And we've seen Brandon Beane be very aggressive in the draft. And I don't know how many years running it seems like he's traded up in every single draft, because he gets a little bit antsy and he wants to go make that move. And it does feel to me like they are a team at the crossroads a little bit in terms of, well, we got Kincaid and we got some secondary players here, and Shakir looks like to have a nice rapport with Josh Allen, but are you really going to run Khalil Shakir out there as your wide receiver one? That they seemed primed to me, and adding the second round pick with Stephon Diggs, that trade gives them a little bit more ammo to be one of these teams that go up and get a player. That being said, we've seen how they've built traditionally. We've seen they haven't drafted. I think Gabe Davis was the highest wide receiver they drafted. They haven't drafted a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds since Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have been there. They've put a lot of value on the lines. And I think the Kansas City's kind of doing something similar there, putting a lot of value on lines and saying, hey, we've got Patrick Mahomes, or, we've got Josh Allen, so we expect them to raise the bar of these other wide receivers that we put around there. We're going to save some money at that position, and we're going to just go out and we're going to try to get the passer that we're playing against. We're playing against Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson, whoever might be in the playoffs. And that's what
Stroud
I think Kansas
now,
City.
right?
What's that?
CJ Stroud now too with Houston.
Yeah, CJ Stroud now too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what kind of the flip that Kansas City made when they actively traded Tyreek Hill away and then loaded up on the defensive line. And that's what we saw in the Super Bowl this year. We saw that defense be absolutely dominant for the Chiefs.
I think that the trouble the Bills have faced or will face trying to move up for one of the third, like top 3, Odunze say, is what they did the year they drafted Allen is they traded their starting left tackle to move up half the distance, basically, with Cincinnati. And they really don't have somebody obvious as that player. It's a tough one to figure out, to guess at.
Spencer Brown might be. They signed La'el Collins, so maybe Spencer Brown might be that guy. But anyways, go ahead.
Maybe. I don't know what his value is. Milano has been suggested around here for this too, but they also don't have a third. And I wonder if Sean McDermott is hot for trading up for another pass catcher. I mean, they went to their running game late last season. They won almost every week. And it is a year where consensus has it that picking a receiver at 28 or even trading down and doing it is it's a fine option. Of the receivers, and Jeff, there are several.
Yeah.
Whether it's Brian Thomas, maybe that's a slide. A.D. Mitchell, Worthy, Polk, Franklin,
McConkey.
McConkey,
Yeah.
on and on, Pearsall, on and on. Is there one, if they don't get lucky enough for the top three, to put it one way, is there one you like the best for them? Mitchell is the one who has mocked them the most often by far.
Mitchell's the one that I like the best for them because I think he's got the biggest range of outcomes, the potential to be the best wide receiver. I think that when you look at where the Bills have kind of won in receiver, he fits a lot of those areas. I think that I will worry a little bit about Brian Thomas. I think he's a fantastic athlete, but in terms of if their teams are just willing to take the deep ball away from Josh Allen in general, and Brian Thomas really succeeds on the deep ball that teams are already taking away from Josh Allen, like is Brian Thomas going to be able to win in those situations? Whereas I think Mitchell has a little bit more opportunity and availability of the just general ability to win in those types of situations. You look at players probably landing into the second round, and I do kind of think, my gut tells me I think the Bills are going to trade back, and I think they're going to try to load up as many shots and as many young players as they can. And I think that they're looking at this maybe as a 2-year window with adding the Diggs pick, and maybe we need to just throw as much youth onto this roster as we can, reset some of these major contracts, because we know Von Miller's still kind of hanging out there and some of these other ones are still hanging out there, and then kind of look at it and say, now we can make a final push for Josh Allen's twilight. That's kind of where I feel like they're landing. You know, that with Mitch Morris leaving and having a player like Zach Frazier from West Virginia, the center that was a wrestler, what screams Sean McDermott more than a center from West Virginia who was a big time wrestler? I mean, that's the.
I'll tell you,
seems like
the corner from Iowa. He screams Sean McDermott too. I can't get his name off the top.
Cooper DeJean.
DeJean, same thing.
These are not compliments, everybody. No. These are not compliments from two of the biggest Bills fans I know. By the way, I just want to mention Mike Evans being a future Hall of Famer is the first bit in the history of the deep end. It goes back to the very first days. Now it's kind of like, all right, yeah, I get it. Everybody agrees. So it's not, it doesn't jump out at you like it used to. Adam, you had a good one there, but then it just became mainstream. And
I know.
Now,
it all got stolen. I do agree. I think A.D. Mitchell would be great. Matt Harmon with Perception just put something out the other day about how he's got some good X receiver value to him on the outside. And I think the Bills would be lucky to get a guy like him. And so, but trading back, I like Ladd McConkey too. There's some, I think they need, and like you said, Jeff, they've always wanted that route runner, right? Diggs is a route runner. They wanted Antonio Brown, route runner. Like, I think they really value that X outside route runner type guy. And I think A.D. Mitchell, I think they're not trading back, fine. But I think, like you said earlier, like if they get a pick or two away from the guy they really want, I mean, that happened to them last year. I think they was a run a receiver like 4 in a row, and then, oh crap, we got to get a pass catcher. They jumped Dallas, I think, to get their tight end, to get Kincaid. Yep. So I think they're flexible up there, and any receiver that they end up getting with their late first or early second, if they trade back, I think will be a top 10 startup, or not startup, but a top 10 rookie dynasty pick, I think.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's to my memory and what I believe I've seen. So when they drafted Josh Allen, they traded for Benjamin right away, and they went and got him big receiver. And then I think Josh Allen kind of said, I don't really like the big receivers. I like the smaller guys that can run routes and able to separate and give me a little bit more space to get it into, relative to trying to force something into a window with a guy who's not able to separate. And that seems to be how they've built the room.
Well, I think
they traded for Benjamin the year before, mid-season, with Tyrod Taylor, and then made the playoffs. And Benjamin was on that team. He remains the only first-round pick that Allen has had in his Bills career.
Receiver. Yeah.
At receiver. Zay Jones was a second-round pick from the Mahomes year, so 17 the year before as well. I'm a numbers guy first, and the yards per route run stuff on Thomas and Mitchell are pretty scary, I think. So statistical, historical comparisons do not shine a positive light on those guys. That there always are exceptions, and but the other receivers on the team, but the quarterback play, like you've got just today I saw a montage of missed passes deep to AD Mitchell. Like, all right, well, I'm sure that happens for a lot of these other guys too, but he's just half of what Harrison is ish in that category. And it makes me, I don't want to trade 2 spots up for Dalton Kincaid. Every single trade up you've ever seen, there's an easy hole to poke in it after the fact, whether it's Mayer or Laporta last year. They traded up for Kyer Elam the year before, who they literally made inactive for games, as you guys know, down the stretch here. So stay cool. A trade back, maybe you get that 3rd round pick. That would be very nice to have. They're loaded on day 3, but they don't have round 3. And then you can get to Worthy or Franklin or one of these other guys that undoubtedly we'll be talking about all day Friday, having slipped into day 2. Jeff, before you go, you gave me a few running back names. Running back is the most interesting position to me for this. I don't think I'm drafting at all before the NFL draft, but I would love to know Dallas or, which of these teams, Cincinnati maybe is one. Is there a running back fit? It's probably not day 1, if even day 2 for some of these teams. But do you have 1 or 2 that come to mind quickly, running back in team where the marriage you would really like?
So I think the ones I gave you pre-show, I had Marshawn Lloyd going to the Bengals, which I think would be pretty interesting in terms of his pass catching ability and big play ability. I had Audric Estime in Buffalo because I think that they've been circling around these big power backs, and I think they'd love to stop using Josh Allen as the quote unquote snowplow and would love to get a power back in there. And then I had Jalen Wright going to the Ravens, and I really like that fit in terms of what they're able to, the spacing that Lamar Jackson's able to create, and the ability to get players into conflict. What we saw Keaton Mitchell do a little bit last year, I feel like Jalen Wright is like that type of player on steroids, where the bigger frame, you're not worried about him breaking down so much, the ability to hit home runs there. But really, when you kind of circle this class at Wright, I think Lloyd, I think Jonathan Brooks, Dallas gets talked about a lot with Jonathan Brooks, but those are the types of backs that I think give you the potential 3-down skill set that I do expect teams to love relative to some of the more situational pieces.
And you want a little bit of draft capital there too. Like day 2 will suffice. Yeah. So that, teams where there might be somebody, if it's a 2nd round pick or even a 3rd round pick, you would expect that player to get a good look.
And it's interesting too, because you flash back to last year, the players that we were so excited about were, Zach Charbonnet and then Kendre Miller and then even Tajay Spears. They all basically killed their stock on draft night because of what the landing spots that they landed in with other backs in those backfields. And you saw teams that kind of the belief now with what we've seen in terms of team building of one extreme to the other, that if you are a team that values running back to the point you've already invested in running back, I feel like you're more likely to draft a running back early because you put value on the position, versus if you're a team that has just been fine hodgepodging the position. We so often say, well, that's an obvious hole for them. They're going to take a running back, but maybe they just don't value the position at all, and they figure they can get anybody to throw in there and be passable in terms of their scheme.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you get teams like – excuse me, there's so many injuries at the running back position every year in the NFL. Like, you just know if he's on a roster and you're the number 2 back, even the number 3 back, you're going to get a shot. You brought up Estime. Like, he reminds me a lot. I'm looking at the strengths and weaknesses on the draft guide here, and I just, he's like 9th or 10th at running back. He reminds me of Kyron Williams, right? Like, no one thinks he's actually very great of a player, but he ends up in a spot where, he gets the role in an offense that in a workhorse role, and he's a fantasy league winner. So it's like, if he lands in the right spot or gets an injury to the guy in front of him, and that's any running back. So I think as long as you're 1 or 2 on a depth chart, I don't even know if, yes, draft, capital matters to the team that took him, but at some point they're just going to play their best player, or there's going to be an injury and they're going to be forced to.
And I think it's, as a dynasty player, I think one of the things that we struggle with in the offseason is thinking about who is my running backs going to be. But how often do you see it? It's become the thing now where you look at, you were playing Ty Chandler down the stretch, or you're playing these guys down the stretch. And so as long as you can fill your dynasty bench with as many of those shots, this is a week-to-week game. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that I believe in, that's been instilled to me from much smarter people than me is you're worried about week to week. In Dynasty, we're trying to think long view. And you want the Breece Hall or the Bijan Robinson, so you don't have to think about your running back position. But the reality of it, when it comes down to it, is week to week, you might be starting Tyler Algier because Bijan Robinson's out. And then you're swinging Ty Chandler in there. And then you've got whatever backup for the Bengals and whatever it ends up being. And how often do we see those teams win fantasy championships?
It is super annoying. Right. I mean, that's a great concept to embrace, because if you don't, it just haunts you.
Yeah.
Like you've drafted these they have everything going for them, but then an injury, which seems almost inevitable at times, and you get backdoored by somebody starting one or all of those names. That's a tough one to live with. Well, thank you, Jeff. We all love the draft. Next week, here it comes, and we've learned a lot from you tonight and through your site and the draft guide. I love the comps. Aren't the comps the most fun? Or
I love doing them. So I do the wide receivers. So I this year wrote up about 65 wide receivers. So watch film on 65 wide receivers and do the write-ups, and the comps are my absolute favorite. And I really like to lean into, I try to look at the comps as they were in college. So like my comp to Malik Neighbors is Torrey Holt. And I went back and double checked, and I watched some Torrey Holt at NC State. And I was like, this is who I see. This is the explosions there, like that type of thing. And so try to like put them on a similar trajectory in terms of value, but also like play style, try to marry all those things.
It's also a fun guessing game. So I'm scrolling down and I'm trying not to look at who the comp is. And who would you put, or wasn't you, I guess, but from your staff, was it Caleb Williams, Aaron Rodgers?
Yes.
Like that, I could have been here all day. I could have been here all day. I love it.
That's right.
Thank you, Jeff. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.
Mike Shope, Adam Crowhurst. Adam, final thoughts?
I'm excited. Next week we'll have another episode leading into the draft, and we'll post our the podathons we're going to be doing for all the drafts for FFPC coming up. And it's exciting. I am excited for this draft so I can start drafting with conviction.
So we have at least 10 FFPC drafts in different tournaments planned for live streams.
Yes.
And we'll want some of those, like on a random weeknight, might not easily fill. So be sure to follow Deep End FF1. We'll announce which draft it's going to be. We'll maybe do it all in bulk, and then little bit by little bit as we get closer to each one if we need to.
Yep.
And hopefully we'll have at least one known expert from the industry join us and draft with us and do the live stream with us. That's going to be the Fantasy Pros. Some of these are underway. Fantasy Pros is underway. That'll be the 125 best ball. That'll be a few $35 leagues, different formats to play around with. But just follow the Twitter account and you'll get the first information on which of those we'll be doing. I mean, secret is out, I guess. Most of these are going to be on Tuesday nights. So
that's right.
If you're looking to draft with us or against us, maybe you feel like we're an easy mark. Tuesdays through the summer, not every week exactly, but most weeks between Memorial Day and the start of the season.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks again to Jeff Bell. Mike and Adam, we'll see you here next Tuesday, closer to the draft, week of. Should be fun. Be sure to like and subscribe, 5-star reviews. All that helps us grow this, more people to see the show, more people to talk about the show with, everything good like that, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, all of it. Thanks for doing that. Mike and Adam, we'll see you next week.
See you guys.
From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the hosts, the research they do, the production costs? Go to PlayerProfiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.